Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we are finally going to be talking about the newest album from Jeff Rosenstock called Worry. So I've mentioned a number of times throughout the past 3 years that I've done this series that I'm not the biggest fan of nihilistic artwork. Not because I find the themes morally repugnant so much as they can just get kind of tedious after a while. You can wallow in your own depravity and debauched hedonism all you want, but at least try to switch it up once in a while to say something interesting about your condition. Looking at you, future. Now, that's not to say that music with dark or more depressing themes doesn't work for me, especially if the writing and instrumentation can twist in some interesting directions. So enter Jeff Rosenstock, a name you're probably most familiar with from the New York punk and ska scene, namely as the frontman of Arrogant Sons of Bitches, the DIY sky punk collective Bomb the Music Industry, and the indie rock group Kudrow. But where I started to take more notice was his solo work, and when I say that I mean my notice was driven by a bunch of music critics I otherwise respect telling me insistently that I need to hear this guy. And sure enough, they were right, because Jeff Rosenstock's music is right up my alley. A punk that's smart enough to temper his anthems in the sort of overwritten but self-deprecating material to temper a lot of the vibe, with a frankly astounding level of detail to paint those pictures, both instrumentally and lyrically. His music reminded me a little bit of Frank Turner in a weird way, with the maturity of the punk mindset and a commitment to some ridiculously catchy music. But I think Rosenstock squeezed more instrumental styles and tones into his first two solo records, aptly titled I Look Like Shit and We Cool, grabbing from ska and garage rock and lo-fi and even synth punk to form a ruckus, utterly unpredictable sound that, really did stick with me. I really like those albums. As such, while this has been a long time coming, I really wanted to check out his newest release this year, Worry. So, did it hold up to all the hype? Well, okay. Here's the thing. This album is everything that I want from Jeff Rosenstock, and it's exactly the record that I think a very specific demographic needed right now, and will continue to need for the next couple of years. Make no mistake, we're gonna need a real punk music to keep up some sort of cultural momentum more than ever, and I can say all of that with the acknowledgement that by the time we hit the second half of this record, it doesn't really click with me as deeply as I wanted to. I want to love this album, say it's one of the best of the year, but it doesn't really get there for me because I'm not the biggest hardcore punk or ska fan. Now, does Worry crystallize a form of the genre that I enjoy? Yeah, of course. But I've always been fond of the more melodic side of punk music, and this material doesn't quite get there for me personally. I like a lot of it, and the first half of this album is really something amazing, but the second half, don't quite love it in the same way. And believe me, that's kind of frustrating given how much praise I want to give this record for essentially doing all the right things. Because this is indeed a great punk album. It hits on very relevant content, moods, and anxieties right now that I can see having tremendous relevance going forward. I'll say it again. On the surface, sure, Rosenstock isn't drifting that far away from themes that he's touched on before, a perpetually hungover, earnest but painfully self-aware desire to hold on to something real and human in the face of a rapidly mutating technological and chaotic world, but things, of course, aren't nearly that simple. For one, the riot might be going on, but it's becoming increasingly easy to shut it out and paralyze and ignore it thanks to social media and social pressure. Eviction and gentrification rarely inspire white liberals to break out into the streets and protest, even if they should be, especially when it becomes increasingly easy to say, well, it's not happening to me, it's not that bad. Hell, people settle into routines, they fall in line, and even when they might say, life is so fucked up these days, the explosion into righteous rage and protest isn't happening the way it should. And not leave someone like Rosenstock, who is very much still living in that sort of peril right now in a perpetual state of very real anxiety. And he's also very much acutely aware of it, and it's such a slow process for people who aren't otherwise paying attention, and they will not figure it out till it's too late. And the framing is always very clear to put himself in that same picture. After all, like everyone else, he's terrified of change. In a world that's constantly changing and evolving and somehow becoming more authoritarian, often for the worse of the general public, it's exhausting to be constantly screaming about it. Hell, just to be constantly aware of it. And that anxiety permeates this record and leads to some really powerful lyrical moments. Festival song where he sees sponsored musicians screaming to fight the power, and the fashion industry commercializing and glamorizing the punk aesthetic and turning it into just another trend. Staring out the window at your old apartment, sees him looking in on a friend in unfamiliar territory story after her landlord renovated her place in a way that was kind of tacky and disconcerting. But hell, where else is she supposed to go at this point? She has to stay there. Now then, to be a ghost, it's probably one of the most potent statements against the disaffection of internet culture that you're ever going to hear. From trolls to trending hashtags to the isolation of social media to the information overload that all seeks for you to just tune you out, be it passive, active, or taken of your own free volition. Hell, the fuzz takes that struggle and makes it very real, speaking on police brutality. It's all about you not caring about the oppression around you as it systemically grows, urging you to just tune out the noise and walk that straight and narrow. Hell, Rosenstock even places himself in the picture on Wave Goodnight to the Me, where ever-increasing age has him wondering what he could have done with the right foresight, especially with so much slipping away around him. So he clings to whatever moments of fun and life and joy he still feels, because there needs to be something, and that leads to one of the most potent gut punches of all on this album. Even if you stand and fight, you stay tuned in, you speak out, you cling to those awkward, rough-edged, half-sober moments and hookups that matter and might even push change in the end, it's never gonna feel like enough. And it will never be perfect. You're never gonna get that perfect, crystal clear, happy ending. And sure, that's kind of true too if you fall in line, but acute self-awareness of it all makes it an active, draining part of your psyche. But that's because Rosenstock gets that. That's what makes life worth living. And as he says on While You're Alive, love is worry. Or to put it in terms of one of my all-time favorite TV shows, if love is like a promise, it's a promise to try real hard. It doesn't mean that you can't fail. Man, I can go on for an hour about how much I love these themes and how great of a detailed yet precise writer that Rosenstock is. Self-aware to the point of paralysis, but one that he knows and recognizes and makes a point to drive the message of the album. But we eventually have to get to Rosenstock and the music itself. In short, this guy is one hell of a frontman, and he throws himself into this material to the point where his voice sounds utterly spent on some songs and moments, especially on some high notes. And yet, kind of fits, especially thematically, with how you would expect a guy in this situation to sound. I won't say that some of the wheezier moments in his voice don't get distracting, but really that's a minor issue, especially considering this album is a simply blazing clip. It really moves quickly. It might start off with a piano melody that eventually picks up into a rough approximation of a pub sing-along, but from there it rarely slows down at all, blazing across hardcore, synth punk, indie rock, and even hints of ska on songs like Rainbow. And while the first half of this record is not flawless, I'm not wild about how the instrumentation drops out for an obviously synthetic segment near the end of Pash Rash, which shows up again in a similar way on the borderline fuzzy chiptuning as the tapping beat later on the fuzz. It probably has the most cohesive and fully formed songs the first half of this album, from the wiry synth punk of festival song to the seedy organ that fuels the Weezer-esque bass interplay and ramshackle vibe of staring out the window at your old apartment. Hell, I'd argue the bass groups are some of the most underrated highlights of this album in driving that melodic interplay, from the bright melody lines of Wave Goodnight to Me to how it becomes the foundation of the mostly acoustic To Be a Ghost and While You're Alive until they explode as mirror images to each other, both in instrumentation and lyrics, to how on a brief breathing moment of Bang on the Door it gives Rosenstock's fast-paced delivery a chance to breathe a little bit. But really, you need moments like that, or the opening of Hellhole, especially on the second half of this record, where the hardcore influences erupt to the forefront and songs have barely hit the 2-minute mark. And yet, still even more amazingly, Rosenstock still manages to cram in more and more hooks that could easily sustain much longer songs, almost to the point where I would hesitate to call these fragments. Oh, for sure, some of them are. Both Pietro 60 Years Old and especially Planet Luxury feel like that to me, especially the latter. But again, I'm not the biggest hardcore punk fan, and I can imagine those who like that genre a lot more will probably really enjoy the hell out of these pieces for how frenetic and riotous they are. They really have a lot of energy, I will give him that, and again, Rosenstock throws himself into this. But you know what, as a whole, while I can easily admit that I dig the lyrics and themes more than some of the composition, especially on the hardcore side, this is a great punk album with the sort of edge, brains, and charm to really stick with me. At this point, Rosenstock is practically an elder statesman in his scene and genre, but he's using it to make music that's just as furious, vibrant, and relevant as so many of his peers, if not more so. In other words, this album's awesome, 8 out of 10 from me. It's not even just recommended. If you can't find less than 40 minutes to take this in, and you can download it for free from his donation-based label, you're inevitably wasting time at some point in your day. Turn off Netflix and tune into this. It is worth it. Definitely get on this one, folks. You will not regret it. It's great. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. I'd like to like and subscribe. I'd be more than grateful. I got the poll up here, so yeah, everyone who agrees with me, there's your opportunity to prove it. Although I can see some of you probably saying that I should have liked this more, but hey, I'm not a huge hardcore guy. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if you guys want to get involved in the scheduling process of upcoming reviews, up until list week that is, I've got the link to my Patreon right here. 3 times a week, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, you guys get a chance to vote on the schedules. And on Saturdays, for people in the higher Patreon levels, you guys get to add either albums or movies to my schedule. The link for more details is there, but until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.